Objective Music Report, the only source of objectively correct music criticism on the entire internet. And today, we have arguably the most important video in the history of music. Because my opinions are objectively valid and scientifically proven to be correct, I am often asked to give a comprehensive look at the entire music canon. Now remember, there is no sarcasm dripping from my voice, and this video is entirely not tongue-in-cheek. Everything I say is genuinely the truth and unquestionable, although I must stipulate that I will probably make updates to this list in the future. Okay, now that I'm past the meme, I'm going to outline a few ground rules for my top 100 albums of all time list. Rule number 1. Each artist is restrained to only 3 albums unless they are in multiple music groups. Rule number 2. Soundtracks and live albums will be included, but the list will primarily focus on studio albums. With that, I'm ready to begin my list. Number 100, Get Up With It by Miles Davis, a mesmerizing and confusing jazz fusion and ambient album that bursts with creativity on every track. Number 99, Street Hassle by Lou Reed, an underrated Lou Reed project which indulges in so much messiness and strange production techniques that it becomes a one-of-a-kind record. Number 98, Swans Are Dead 95-97 by Swans, a monolithic live record covering multiple years of touring that contains some absurdly powerful post-rock tracks. Number 97, The End of Evangelion soundtrack by Shirō Sagisu, an emotional soundtrack scored with both traditional classical arrangements and enchanting pop songs. Number 96, Underground Volume 1 by 3-6 Mafia, a compilation of 666 Mafia's first material that is just as disturbed and creepy as it is hype-inducing. Number 95, MBV by My Bloody Valentine, an inventive follow-up to Loveless that covers new ground but also recaptures that same initial genius. Number 94, 1999 by Prince, a dozen ambitious synth-pop songs with a surprising amount of both depth and charm. Number 93, Daughter of Darkness by Natural Snow Buildings, an extremely brutal journey of an album that trudges through heavy drone and ambient passages. Number 92, In Rainbows by Radiohead, a diverse collection of classic Radiohead tracks that all achieve inspired art rock bliss. Number 91, Ants From Up There by Black Country New Road, an inventive combination of chamber pop and post-rock that captures some beautiful emotions surrounding romance and heartbreak. Number 90, Berlin by Lou Reed, a concept album about drug use and domestic abuse that covers the painful story of a doomed German couple. Number 89, Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd, Pink Floyd's iconic album which brilliantly explores the spectrum of human life and existence. Number 88, Smile by Brian Wilson, Brian Wilson's return to the unfinished Smile record from the 60s, with the result living up to its underlying legacy. Number 87, The Tired Sounds of Stars of the Lid by Stars of the Lid, an expedition through minimal but potent ambient pieces. Number 86, Replica by Oniya Heatrix Point Never, a chilling and exciting plunderphonics record with bewildering song structures perfect for early morning walks. Number 85, Slanted and Enchanted by Pavement, a group of slacker indie rock songs with abstract lyrics and an unimpeachable vibe. Number 84, Live at Cine by Jeff Buckley, a nearly perfect set list of a solo performance from Jeff Buckley, simultaneously a magical and highly personal portrayal. Number 83, You Forgotten People by Broken Social Scene, a genuinely brilliant hour of pristine and emotional pop underscored with inspired songwriting. Number 82, Red by King Crimson, prog rock and metal record from the kings of prog rock, individually creative and powerful rock songs. Number 81, Raw Power by the Stooges, punishing proto-punk with an inexplicably high energy ceiling. I prefer the heavily distorted Iggy Pop mix. Number 80, Triple X by Danny Brown, a lyrically dense and instrumentally creative record with a hard-hitting but subtle emotional arc. Number 79, Sister by Sonic Youth, ingenious songwriting paired with angular passion, a sort of punk angst combined with subtlety. Number 78, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles, a psychedelic and theatrical testament to the lasting genius of the Beatles' desire to distance themselves from the live stage and experiment in the studio. Number 77, Songs of Leonard Cohen by Leonard Cohen, an extremely impressive selection of tantalizing and delicate folk songs delivered by a sage in a young man's body. Number 76, Suicide by Suicide, a horrifying nightmare masquerading itself as a synth-punk record. The anger at societal grievances takes horrifying shapes. For part 2 of this list, I'm moving through albums 75 through 51, and I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach. I'm still going to be trying to move relatively quickly, but I am going to go a little more in depth. I'm going to be mostly, instead of a pre-rehearsed voiceover like that was, I'm going to be instead, you know, sort of in the moment analyzing the albums and sort of speaking about them, trying to keep things to like 30 seconds at max. So if, you know, I feel like I'm going too fast, feel free to leave a comment asking me about something if you're curious, but primarily just presume, you know, you can look at these things up in the description. You'll find plenty of other material and people commenting about these albums. Anyways, moving on. Number 75, To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar. Now, Kendrick, you should be no stranger to him. On my other videos, I'm talking about his latest album, but this I think is his magnum opus. I think it's his best album, and you'll find plenty of other people agreeing with that sentiment. The story behind it is so impactful and so emotional. And the way it's told is so creative, and every single individual song here is contributing to a greater whole, a greater lore, but that each song, I don't know any song that doesn't stand on its own. Even the interludes work as standalone songs you can listen to. 74, Twin Peaks Limited Event Series soundtrack for the 3rd season by Angelo Badalamenti. This is a soundtrack for the Twin Peaks' 3rd season, the return season, at 25 years after the original show. And this season is one of the most like heart-wrenching, like anything television or film related. And the soundtrack, Twin Peaks is always iconic for its soundtrack, but the 3rd season soundtrack conveys those original Twin Peaks songs with like this new heart-wrenching, distorted material that's more modern, and you kind of contrast the two, and I think it makes a really good record. Number 73, When the Pawn ... by Fiona Apple. This is Fiona Apple's 2nd album, and it's one of my favorites. Absolutely just immaculate voice, and the way the piano is used, it almost acts as a perfect side by side, like actually just as a perfect extension of the voice of Fiona. Her emotion comes through in all of it, and the songwriting is just elevated by both her voice and her energy, and the way the piano contributes to that. Number 72, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn by Pink Floyd. This is Pink Floyd's first album when they were still headed by Syd Barrett, and just it's one of the wackiest albums. These strange, never-ending melodies, these extended instrumental improvisational skirmishes, just so much fun, so much bonker, so much things to just cinch on and just listen to dozens and dozens of times. Number 71, Electric Ladyland by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. This is Jimi Hendrix's last album, a double album, and in this album he creates like essentially his own world. I mean, his previous albums are obviously great, but on this album every single song is unique, and every single song is contributing to this greater, like, just universe of different, like, there's not like a cohesive through line, but they all feel like they're contributing to some greater message, some greater, I don't know, universe that this album just fully contends in and of itself. It is just immaculate. Number 70, Heroes by David Bowie. The title track is one of the most just moving songs of all time. But just the rest of the material here is great too. Similar to Low by David Bowie, it has a progression from poppier songs to more ambient pieces, and the pop songs are amazing. The ambient sections are interesting to listen to. Just all around great. Number 69, The Ascension by Glenn Branca. This is a hard album to explain. Glenn Branca is essentially a classical composer, but he's utilizing atonal, so like, you know, not in any particular key, strange tunings, guitars, to create these insane post-rock, heavily like these insane crescendos and just dynamic movements that contribute to like these like viscerally moving pieces, I guess, in the classical terminology. 68, Fetch the Bolt Cutters, also by Fiona Apple. This is my personal favorite Fiona Apple album. It came out in 2020. You know, in the midst of all the quarantine stuff. The fact that this album is more like out there, more experimental, and more just like more unconstrained. That actually lends well to that voice and the extension of the piano as part of the voice that I was talking about earlier. It just lets her get full boundaries, cover more drastic, emotional, forbearing topics in her music, and I think this is why it's her best album, although the rest of her material is incredible too. Number 67, Illinois by Sufjan Stevens. This album, I love it because there's this dynamic contrast where it's these extremely intimate folk rock songs, and you'll have this intimate, like, it feels like, you know, you're right in the room with Sufjan, and then it'll evolve into this, it'll evolve into these highly orchestrated, immaculate just songs that are exploding with energy. And the fact that there's this dynamic difference between the two, like it still feels like you're in that intimate moment while the orchestra is playing and while there's this swelling of emotions elsewhere. Number 66, Crooked Rain by Pavement. This is Pavement's, my favorite album from them. It has this just strange, highly, the song, there's just something strange about it, and there's just something like just kind of just interesting to play with. When you listen to it, when you're like thinking about it in the abstract sense, there's like these like, just his lyrics, and I feel like it just gets the weirdest like unintuitive spot, like the way they incorporate like country music. Like it shouldn't work. Like it doesn't, it's not a formula that you write down on paper and makes sense. But for whatever reason, you know, amazing songs all around here. I'd say it's incredible. 65, Master of Reality by Black Sabbath. I think this is the album where I listened to the first song, Sweet Leaf, and I just listened to those guitar tones, and like the first time I listened to this, I finally got why metal is so amazing, because the guitar, the power chords on there, and just the way the guitars sound, they have just this incredibly satisfying, visceral sound, and every single song is just built off of repeating that sound over and over again. So like accessible, and like so immediately, like you can immediately understand why they're great, but so creative as well, where they're just doing different things on every song, but still hitting that same beat every single time. Number 64 is Merryweather Post Pavilion by Animal Collective. This is Animal Collective's probably their most, probably like their album that leans the most into pop sounds and electronic music, obviously. I think like their experimental edge and like just the weird sort of like things they were known for beforehand, I think they've lent themselves really well to this particular sound. They just have such a big playbook to deal with, but in this realm of, in this musical context that just like creates these awesome earworms, these like kaleidoscopic images that you're like never lost in, but like are just so beautiful. I don't know, really love this album. 63, Hunky Dory, also by David Bowie. Hunky Dory, I think it's just a completely different style than every other David Bowie album. The presence of the piano in like those first few tracks, you have Life on Mars, which may be even better than Heroes. It's so acoustic too. And it kind of is like David Bowie's like, almost like his folk project, despite the fact that he's such a kind of a pop oriented, like outspoken, you know, artist. Like this is almost like his like intimate portrayal of himself. I think you kind of get that on like the theatrics of Life on Mars, or almost like, you know, poking fun at itself. Moving on, 62, The College Dropout by Kanye West. You can tell if you know like the, you know, obviously pretty well-known story of Kanye at this point, where he spent years as a producer, never able to have his career take off as a rapper, and you could hear like he's given this one chance, and he put everything in to make sure this works. Like all the beats are incredible, all the rhymes and all the raps are just so infused with like this like creative energy just flowing around everywhere. There's so many interesting topics he covers, so many interesting ways of pursuing things, and so many just incredible beats. You can tell like he's like, this is I gotta make this work. I need to do this. This is like my one shot, and like he nailed it, like nailed the landing perfectly. 61, Selected Ambient Works, 85 to 92 by Aphex Twin. I think this album, I think there's something just ethereal quality to it that I just cannot explain. I think there's like this, if you listen, there's like this constant like buzzing and like fuzz and all these songs are like, they're like decently lo-fi, even though that's not like a term you usually think of when you think of this album, because it's so immaculately like constructed. It doesn't even feel like something some dude just made in his bedroom. Like it feels like, these feel like eternal songs. And I think that's why this album sticks out to me so strongly, and why it still like hits me every single time I listen to it. Number 60, Paranoid by Black Sabbath. This is Black Sabbath's best album. It is like the pinnacle of just the the songwriting and the riffs just hit their peak. There's a reason like almost every single song on this album is like super iconic. There's so many just moments and just a perfection of the metal sound, like so early, I guess, in the genre's like development. And I think it's like further cements like Black Sabbath is like probably the best metal artist of all time. Number 59, The Disintegration Loops by William Basinski. This is an ambient album. I don't want to go too deeply into the underlying story and the lore behind it in the sake of time. Definitely look into it though. It adds a level of meaning to the album. But essentially what's happening here is it's an ambient project, and it's based on these musical tape loops, and the tapes were very old, it was based off of, and so as the tapes were repeated, they slowly started to disintegrate, and the fidelity to the sound like weakens and weakens, and it gives you this really interesting, super like emotional progression of, you have this like full loop, and then by the end it's just like it's the last whimperings of what's ever holding on. 58, Close to the Edge by Yes. Yes is a very theatrical, very progressive rock band, and this is somehow the most indulgent and the least indulgent album of all time, because they'll go on dozens of excursions. They'll take you to the most wild, outlandish places, but it never feels like they never lose me. Like every single thing feels like it's intended. Every single moment feels like perfect. Like it doesn't. There's no point where I'm like, that was odd. I shouldn't have oh, too far there. No, there's never a moment where like I'm like, oh, this song has gone on for too long, or oh, this part is annoying, or can we get back to this? Like it's always, it feels so perfectly orchestrated, and there's no dead air. There's like, it's perfect, bang, 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 bang. Number 57, Sung Tongs, also by Animal Collective. Sung Tongs is just all about, the whole album is about the acoustic guitar and just how nice of an instrument, how nice the timbre of just playing notes on it sounds. And the way the band approaches just manipulating them in recordings and just playing them in strange tunings, it just wraps itself up in its own world, and there's something so creative where they're managing with acoustic guitars things most people couldn't even do with electric ones. It's beautiful. Number 56, Ladies and Gentlemen, We Are Floating in Space by Spiritualized. This album I think also has a bit of that dynamic contrast I was mentioning with Sufjan, but on like maybe even an arguably a greater level. They have these massive heights, this massive like space theme, and it's so existential and so powerful and so just like so self-reflective. And in the fact that they're covering so much, it's so expansive and so large, they're also coming back to this human element. Like you're just like comparing yourself in the sea of all of this. It's like Ladies and Gentlemen, We Are Floating in Space. That whole title perfectly encapsulates just the feeling of listening to the album. 55, Exile on Main Street by the Rolling Stones. This is probably just so grimy of a record, but there's like you can like just feel this like edge and this like visceral dirt and grime, and like this like this horny, like disgusting, like depraved energy. And it like comes from this beautiful, just all these beautiful bluesy songs. The covers are great. Just so many iconic moments that you always like, I come back to it, and like, because it's so long, there's like always a new song where I'm like, yo, this is like my new favorite. 54, Karma by Pharoah Sanders. I think the best way to describe this album is like, if you started this album at the 25-minute mark, I don't know if you'd be able to like last for like more than like 30 seconds, which just like sound like complete noise and be like disgusting. But the thing is, when you let Pharoah Sanders string you along on the journey from the beginning of Creator Has a Master Plan, once you let him like string you along, he envelops you in this world to the point where when you get to these ridiculous heights, it's like you realize, oh wait, when I started this at 25 minutes and I just listened to it, like it's because like it just hadn't clicked with me yet. It's so spiritual and so massive, and just so confounding that like you need to like he perfectly is straddling on the line of like you're always constantly on the line of like, this is like way too much, like I can't handle this, like this is like terrible, and like this is like beautiful, it's like changing my life forever, you know. Number 53, Highway 61 Revisited by Bob Dylan. This I think is just like the perfect application of Bob Dylan's like songwriting and his voice to like a musical environment. So like his like the images and like the imagery his lyrics are like portraying, you can like chew on forever. But I think also like the sound it's paired with, like you have like the proto-punk songs like Tombstone Blues, you have like just like the super long and almost aimless like Desolate Row, like the sort of like the instrumental palette is so attuned for what Dylan's singing and what his voice is, you know, the actual quality of his voice. Number 52, Fear of Music by Talking Heads. I think this is the like, I think this album perfectly portrays what I find so interesting about David Byrne as like a singer and a frontman for the band. The way he sort of like approaches topics lends itself like just like the weird angular way. I think his like lyrics are like describing the world. It works so well in the context of the super like jarring but like extremely catchy and rhythmic music of the Talking Heads. And number 51, Nevermind by Nirvana. This is just like, it's a perfect encapsulation of like the year it came out and like the grunge environment. Like there's a reason like it's arguably like the most easily like the most iconic album of like what, like the last 40 years. Cobain's songwriting is just like so, his lyrics are perfectly written for the songs, and his actual songwriting is so, the actual like riffs and stuff they're playing are just like so entertaining, and like so timeless. Like, there's a reason, people will still be listening to Smells Like Teen Spirit for the next, 40 years. Hello and welcome to part 3 for albums 50 to 26. Now in this part I'm going back to a voiceover, but I'm not going to immediately reveal what the album is, and I'm going to instead talk about it and then reveal the title before moving to the next album. Okay. Number 50 is an art pop album from one of my favorite artists that combines electronic and pop music into just an incredible blend that changed the idea of what I thought pop music could be before I listened to it. It's Post by Bjork. Number 49 is a desolate and decrepit vaporwave album from the only artist who's ever been able to make the genre work for me. It's highly inventive and creative, but also heartbreaking at the same time. It's Chuck Person's Echo Jams Volume 1 by Chuck Person, or Oni Hitrix Point Never. Number 48 is a double album made up of 2 completely different halves, which somehow synergize perfectly with one another. It's simultaneously depressing, disturbed, and exhilarating. It couldn't be anything else but The Powers That Be by Death Grips. Number 47 is an album which holds a lot of personal nostalgia for me, but for good reason, because it contains some of the best songwriting from one of the most impressive artists of all time in a time of complete and utter personal turmoil. It's Rumors by Fleetwood Mac. Number 46 is an album that's so sleazy it could only be portrayed by the image on the cover. It's clear as coming from a band which is made up of both masterful songwriters and perfect performers. It's Sticky Fingers by the Rolling Stones. Number 45 is an indie album predicated on highly relatable angst, at least for me. It's super original and bonkers, but most importantly, heartfelt and intimate. It's Emergency and I by the Dismemberment Plan. Number 44 is a space rock album whose drones evoke a subtle euphoria. Its emotion pours out wholeheartedly from its pure gentleness. It's Laser-Guided Melodies by Spiritualized. Number 43 is a highly original combination of stoner metal and lo-fi rock. Its riffs reach the bottom caverns of the soul, with performances that feel like a spike of adrenaline. It's Akuma no Uta by Boris. Number 42 is a psychedelic rock album, with songwriting that seems like it was dictated by God himself. Each song feels like a feat, with the tortured swagger of Jim Morrison leading the charge. It's The Doors by The Doors. Number 41 is a psychedelic R&B record by a man whose voice speaks for itself. The songs are both delectable, but also bittersweet. Not only is the album doused in creative intentions, but it's also filled to the brim with emotion. It's Blonde by Frank Ocean. Number 40 is an album so unbelievably celebrated by so many people, it would be unnecessary to go into any depth here. It's an alt-rock masterwork from a band known for creating masterpieces. It's OK Computer by Radiohead. Number 39 is an album which completely manipulated the ways I saw electronic, hip-hop, and even pop music. It takes those genres and grinds them to distorted images, but ones you can't help but be caught up in. It's The Money Store by Death Grips. Number 38 is the quintessential group and 90s hip-hop album. From a group of rappers so creative and talented, it couldn't have been anything but a masterpiece, especially when underscored by the brilliant production of RZA. It's Enter the Wu-Tang by Wu-Tang Clan. Number 37 is the quintessential album of the 60s. On a less grand scale, the songs might still be perfect. But with the lush ornamentation, it's not hard to see why this album has remained so prevalent for so long. It's Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys. Number 36 is by far the best pop album masquerading as a soundtrack. Each song here is endowed with a certain electric energy that you just won't get out of your head until you're long past listening to it. It's Purple Rain by Prince. Number 35 might just be the most forward-thinking album on the list. While creative throughout, the experimental level of the album goes from high to extremely high. Hallelujah might just be the best song of all time. It's Tego Mego by Can. Number 34 is an album so optimized for fun you would think it was made by robots. Somehow, in spite of this, the sample-based electronic music always remains totally human and completely unrelenting in its energy. It's Discovery by Daft Punk. Number 33 is a selection of highly intimate tracks, and one sore thumb which blows the top off of the energy coalescing inside. It remains mystical about being perfectly upfront about what it is. It's the Velvet Underground's second self-titled album. Number 32 is an album which reaches depths so depraved and morally questionable that you'd wonder how the artist made it out alive. He seems to wonder as well. The drug-fueled mania is highly visceral and exciting, but also disturbed and depressing. It's Atrocity Exhibition by Danny Brown. Number 31 is a single-song album that grabs you and never lets you go. It starts you in the most beautiful of environments, takes you through a dreamscape you're not prepared for, and brings you back a changed person. It's Long Season by Fishmans. Number 30 is an instrumental hip-hop record so delicious and delectable that it beat out the millions of other hip-hop records I didn't include on this list. It's existential, creative, and highly loopable. It's Donuts by Jay Dilla. Number 29 is a look at the future from the past, both in terms of music and humanity itself. It's a suite from highly original pop songs to dazzling ambient pieces. It's Low by David Bowie. Number 28 is a chamber pop album so innocent and playful that it'll always leave you with at least one tear in your eye. There are less songs and more magical moments captured by a microphone. It's If You're Feeling Sinister by Belle and Sebastian. Number 27 is a post-punk album so perfect, it feels like punk rock's answer to classical music. Not only does the band synergize extremely well, but the songwriting and insightful lyrics leave you with something to think about every single time. It's Marquee Moon by Television. Number 26 is an album by virgins for virgins. But no, seriously, it's an adorably creative project with excruciating emotion hanging off of every word and riff. It's Weezer's Blue Album. Okay, we're finally here. We're finally to part 4, number 25 to number 1. Now, this is a pretty important part of the video. Obviously, I'm gonna be going the most in depth with these albums. I think every single album up until this point, guaranteed, probably a few like preceding, but every single album here I could confidently say is a 10 out of 10. And that doesn't just mean, I think they're like, perfect, because I don't actually think any of these albums are perfect. I don't know if it's possible to create, a perfect work of art besides, just my personality and my persona and everything. Essentially, when I say it's a 10 out of 10, I'm basically saying it's so good, it's in the contention for being my favorite album. Obviously, I do have a ranking. I do feel somewhat confident in the way I've ranked these, but yeah, these are the big boys for me. These are what define my personality. Wish You Were Here was one of the first albums I started to listen to when I first got into, I guess, more exploring music. I think what initially was so interesting about it, and this has become less of a big deal now as I'm more into music, but it was a 45-minute long album made up of 5 songs. So I think the average song is 8 or 9 minutes. But more importantly, in terms of the composition, the first half is basically the first 5 of 9 parts of this song called Shine On You Crazy Diamond, and the last half is the remaining parts of that same song. And they both serve as the intro and outro, and so I think it gives this really interesting framing technique. This is an album about not only just the music industry itself, based on the cover and just a lot of the different characters in the songs. You pretty easy to see Welcome to the Machine, what that's dealing with. But I think what's super interesting is the degree to which that sort of concept is taken to this huge emotional level, portrayed in such an interesting, dynamic, cohesive manner, and creates some just super compelling music. I think why I love Spiderland so much is essentially, if you listen to it, it's actually surprising how much of the album is actually pretty mellow. When you're finished with the album, the things that are the most memorable are obviously these massive heights, the huge riffs, these insane moments, the most raw, crazy thing. But in actuality, a lot of the album is built off these very tense, smaller scale moments. And those are kind of what create the actual tension that makes those big moments actually pay off so well. Because usually, lots of post-rock, lots of albums in this vein, they have these massive climaxes, and they have just plenty of almost filler material kind of, just to sort of warm you down and do this. But I feel there's never a moment, the filler is still so tense and so sharp that it never loses you. And I think that's why I've just always loved this album so much. Led Zeppelin, there's obviously the Tolkien, Lord of the Rings comparisons, but, you know, forget Lord of the Rings. This album is essentially like just the Old Testament of hard rock music. The best word to describe basically every single song on here is epic. You know, you have the more like straightforwardly epic songs like Kashmir, In My Times of Dying. These songs are like pretty straightforwardly like conveying like some epic things. You know, I mean, anyone would listen to them and think that. But I think, you know, in the context of the entire record, even like the more mellow songs, even like, you know, Bronny Ur, they're still like conveying this emotion and this quality of something that is just so, you know, wrapped up in this like massive ethos. I think it's hard to kind of articulate without listening to it. But I mean, just the riffs and just the prowess amongst the four musicians is creating just so many spectacular, immaculate, intense moments that you just can't look past. Now, it might seem a lot, you know, especially if you're not a fan of Led Zeppelin, it might seem a lot for me to put these two basically just back to back, but I don't know how else to convey the fact that I basically see these albums on like the exact same caliber. I really struggle to pick between the two of them. I mean, it's basically just dependent on my mood the day I picked it. But I think I put this one slightly higher, if I had to guess, just because I think it's basically, you know, slightly more consistent and slightly shorter than Physical Graffiti, you know, so maybe I was appealing to people who aren't gonna hunker down for an hour and a half to listen to Physical Graffiti. These four dudes are essentially just like gods among men when it comes to these albums. I just don't understand it. I just don't understand how they had the synergy and the teamwork to just perform some of these songs. John Bonham was insane. They're all just so talented in their respective areas. I just love it. I just love it. I think this was a pretty obligatory pick. You know, I think you could have maybe predicted this album would be somewhere on this list. But I think that's good for good reason. You know, I think you can listen to this album hundreds of times and still find new, unique aspects to it. I mean, just the last time I listened to it, you know, I just had never fully appreciated just like how good the drumming on this album is. I think what I appreciate so much is that the 5 songs on this album are actually like pretty diverse collections of tracks. Like, none of them like sound like the other, and they're all like, you know, covering different territory or like a different musical context. But I think it's kind of hard to look past it because it's sequenced so well, and just the way they're accomplishing, like they're doing basically everything perfect. So it's not like, you know, oh, track 4 was really bad at doing this, so I mean, it's obvious that it's doing something different. Like, they're doing all of the 5 different, you know, portrayals of music. They're doing them all so well and so perfectly that you just kind of forget that, you know, oh, these are like actually pretty different. They're accomplishing 5 different things in all these songs. I think the Glow Part 2, I've always had just like this weird kind of mysterious obsession with it. I mean, the title is kind of just so confusing. It's like, you know, I didn't see another album by this Microphones band that was also called The Glow Part 1. So, I mean, now obviously, you know, as a seasoned Microphones veteran, I know The Glow is actually a song on It Was Hot We Stayed in the Water. You know, you don't obviously, I didn't obviously know that, you know, listening to this for the first time. Well, you know, I've learned some things. I've like, you know, pieced together the story, learned a lot about the band and about Phil Elverum. I think this album is still so mysterious to me. The first time I listened to it, I was like pretty sick and my sinuses were like pretty messed up. And I think that feeling that I had then, I still like carry with me every single time I listen to it. Like, it just like so perfectly portrays kind of like just the gritty, like dirty outdoors, like mystery and lo-fi aspect of this album that I think is just so infinitely replayable. It might be one of the most unique albums on this list, just in terms of, you know, the production and the lyrics and just like how it's structured. Just so many unique things and just so much mystery here to unpack. The last time I listened to it, actually, the final song, My Warm Blood, I feel like was just like such a huge, like, emotional focal point for me. Just like hearing like the whisperings of like the songs you've listened to, and just the heartbeat and the, you know, the drone, which may or may not be inspired by a TV show whose soundtrack was listed previously on this list. Besides the point, really great. Listen to it. This is probably gonna be the most, you know, controversial pick high up on this list. And when I say controversial, I mean like, you know, some people genuinely hate this record. I think it clicks with me for whatever reason. I think the persona that Kanye's going with this on this album, like a hyper portrayal of like the most egotistical of his mannerisms, you know, heightened to this like absurd degree. The first time I listened to this, I remember like some of the moments on site, like some of like the bars, I was just like, my mouth was ajar. It's actually like so absurd how like well this character is portrayed through the actual music, and it's so interesting, like the sort of arc, you know, that sort of happens, you know, where, you know, not to get too much into it, but, you know, his personal failings, you know, sort of become more and more obvious the further you go on until you're finally at the end with Bound 2, where he's like, you know, kind of like has like this new self-acceptance. Such an interesting way to portray this character, and such an interesting just like journey through him on this album. I think the best way to describe Ex-Military is essentially like a super edgy, very internet take on like the early Beastie Boys production and sampling, you know, where they just like, you know, sample whatever the hell they wanted and like sample all these rock songs and like these hip hop beats. But I think, you know, instead of like, you know, having the Beastie Boys MC, sorry, I actually feel bad. I don't have any Beastie Boys on this list. I'm now realizing. But instead of, you know, having one of the Beastie Boys MC, you have just this MC who's the pure embodiment of like primal anger and primal terror. I just don't know if there's anything else in this world which can consistently get me to like an energy level so high than just like turning on like any song from this album. Like anything will do it. We're just like, I'll just like be like, you know, like hyper aware and hyper energetic. I just don't know if there's another album that does this as consistently for me. And I think that's just why every single song here can do it for you. If you want that energy spike, you know, I mean, and you're gonna like this album, I'd listen to it. I'm a big Swans fan, but I think the reason the Seer is like the one that sticks out the most for me is because it's just absurdly tribal. Like I think their other albums are great. They're great at like, you know, conjuring emotion, creating these amazing, you know, soundscapes. But I think like on the Seer, it feels like I'm just like part of like some insane ritual that's going to like bring me into the humanity. And I'm just like in the circle, you know, chanting all these things. Like the peak emotional, like highest, most primal moments, like I'm going like ballistic listening to this. And then once we shift down like to the more like trippy, like psychedelic stuff, like, you know, now I'm like disassociating from myself completely. It just sucks me in, and you feel so fully immersed in it for like the full 2-hour long album. It's incredible. White Light, White Heat, it feels like the kind of album that, you know, it had to be bad in 45, you know, million alternate universes for it to be like amazing in this one. Like there are so many things in this album to just crash and burn, so many ideas that should just not work at all. Like you have The Gift, which is literally just like a spoken word song panned hard in 2 different directions, but it's killer. I love that song. I love that. I love everything about that song. I've like listened to it 50,000 times. I have like the whole story entirely memorized. There's a duet on like Lady Godiva's Operation where I don't even think they're probably not even singing in tune, honestly, but they're like changing who's like they're like completely different mannerisms. But something about it, like there's just like this humor and this like twisted sort of absurd nature to it that just clicked. It just clicks. Sister Ray, one take, you know, if you listen closely, you like riddled with mistakes. This crushing 17-minute long song, but it's just so brilliant. It just works. And I don't know how this album is not terrible. If someone could explain that to me, great, but I still have no idea, but this album is amazing. It's not even the fact that MF Doom and Madlib are just like extremely talented at both what they do, but I think something about Mad Villain, something about that pairing of the two of them is like they're just synergizing with each other perfectly, and I feel like it was like the perfect moment in both their careers for them to be working together. There is so much content on all of these songs. Like Doom has like basically every single line from it is an insane bar, and you know every single Madlib beat is like built on like 16 different things that, you know, you can listen to 15 times and find new things about. And then not only on top of that, but there's like each of the songs is only like a minute and a half. There's like 30 of these, and so, you know, you're like constantly skipping into like new territory. So you can like go back and re-listen to these songs. There's just so much content here. Even though I'm disappointed that we might never get like a follow-up. I mean, apparently there was some follow-up in the works before, you know, MF Doom died, rest in peace. But even though like I'm disappointed that we might never see what those look like, we have so much here that I mean, like I can't even be that upset. The Downward Spiral is probably the darkest album in this entire list, you know, full stop. Like it is actually just extremely painful to listen to. It's just like a nosedive descent into like just some of the most like depraved emotional states a human can actually be in. But, you know, in spite of that like horrible, dark, like depressing energy, like, you know, that would actually kind of get boring after a while, but like this is just such a dynamic and extremely creative and exciting album. You're like in this like wall of like distortion and just like horrible emotion, but, you know, it's so exciting. Just the bubbling and the constant evolving nature of just the music and the narrative and the storyline and the lyrics. Just it creates this experience which, despite being so like disturbing and so miserable, that is also at the same time just extremely exciting. Like it is so, it's all like, I don't even want to say fun, but it almost is fun to listen to these songs. Like it's actually absurd. I think the White Album is basically just the least intuitive concept album of all time. It's essentially a concept album, but the concept is, what if we had no concept and no direction, basically no teamwork, no collaboration, and we all just made an album. And for whatever reason, it's a masterpiece. There's no like rational like underpinning logic to a lot of it, but I feel like for whatever reason, and this might just be like Stockholm Syndrome, or you know, I don't know what the Beatles were fucking doing, but for whatever reason, you listen to it, and it doesn't feel like it's like a faceless collection of songs. The sequencing, it works on this album. It just feels like an album that isn't random, when in actuality it kind of is, but maybe it isn't. That's just the weirdest part. I mean, the Beatles, they could have genuinely put out like a random collection of songs. It probably would have been really, really good if it was this long. But they seemingly did here. But if they did that, it doesn't feel like it would be as good as this. Looking past, you know, the creativity and like the enduring passion thrown into all of these songs, there's just some ethereal quality here that is just like resonates so well with me. Like this album kind of exists in like an oxymoronic state between it being like extremely human and extremely inhuman. Like if you think about it, like so much of the lyrics and so much of like the songs and so much about it is like super cryptic, but I mean at the same time it feels like extremely emotionally intimate. It feels like, you know, you're just kind of like in this, you know, secret place that's stuck between these just two opposing energies, and it just like causes this really weird sensation as you listen to the entire album. I just don't know if I can put into words. Just I don't know if there's any other music. I mean, there's plenty of music that can like, you know, do similar things to this, but I don't know if there's anything that like hits it the exact same way this does. Like the album feels so relatable of being like so, you know, otherworldly and strange. Like it's just like this perfect world of just contradiction. I love it. If you aren't struck with like an immediate desire to dance from just a few seconds of Born Under Punches, I mean, I don't know what to say. I could speculate probably decently well as to, you know, what qualities of the music, like, you know, whether it's just the bass line, just like how punchy the production is. I can speculate as to, you know, how these loops create such a great primal experience. But I think that's kind of just redundant. There's just this energy that's, I guess, just supplemented through, you know, just how uniquely it was produced at the time it was created. But I think what people just don't seem to speculate about or talk about more about this album is how it starts out, you know, more energetic and more primal, but it actually moves, you know, gradually into like more introspective territories. The final few tracks are actually like, you know, like they're much more mellow, and they're like touching like a really, like they're touching much stranger subject matters. Like the Overload is such a different song than, you know, what you're used to at that point, but it kind of feels like you've kind of like eased yourself in, and it's not like that big of a surprise at that point. I think there's just like such a weird gradual evolution that happens throughout the album that I think is what makes it so enduring and what makes it so exciting to listen to every single time. Loveless, yes, I know that album. I think Loveless is essentially just pure bliss created through sound. The lyrics, I think, on this album are actually like under-discussed, underappreciated. I think they're, you know, they tie into really well in evoking those feelings. But I mean, just the sound here is spectacular. It is just like all-encompassing in and of itself. There's no other album I can listen to, and, you know, I can focus on different, like if I want to hear, like if I want to focus on like the higher frequencies and the higher sounds of the mix, like I feel like I can listen to those while I'm listening to this album. It's like I'm looking around in the sound. I know that sounds completely bonkers, and maybe I'm insane and you can't actually do that and I'm just making this up. But maybe it's just a testament to how good the album is that it can, you know, convince me that I'm doing that. I swear I am. I swear like I actually listen to like the lower frequencies, and it's like, you know, I'm like immersed in like a whole new world. Like I'm looking at a different landscape. I might be insane, but that's just what this album does to you, I guess. If it makes you insane, I guess what's not to love? Music for 18 musicians feels like less of a classical piece and more of like a living, breathing organism of sound. The previous image I used was the 1978 original recording But there's actually plenty of different recordings. I prefer some. But I think the fact that like some of these recordings will vary in terms of length by like, 10, 15 minutes, is actually a testament to just how organic and how strangely, humanly structured the actual music is. For a class I had in high school, I had to write about a classical piece. And this is the one I chose. And some of the research I did, I found there were studies that actually likened this to like a literal physical environment in terms of like, there's at different intervals, different events occur. And there's small like progressions in terms of like when certain animals wake up, you can hear their sounds. And when, it gets hotter, like water changes or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I think that's such a good way to actually look at how this album exists, because just the natural slow progression in terms of harmony, like it feels like you're suspended in the state and you're slowly just gradually moving with all these just like beautiful themes sort of intersecting and interweaving with one another. It's so gorgeous, and it just like wraps you in immediately once you start it. This album, Funhouse, is essentially just pure blood and gore pressed into vinyl. It is like pure masculine anger coming through music. The first few times I listened to this album, I was like somewhat, into it. I mean, I was like, oh, it's a cool bass line, all the singers, like, he's got some good energy, blah, blah, blah. But one day, for whatever reason, I came back to it and I put it on, and it's just like, holy shit, like this is hitting. This is like red. This is just so powerful. The songs, like the way the guitar solos are just like so disorderly and erupt, like the rhythm section and the actual guitars, they feel like they're fighting at points. And then Iggy Stooge, I guess at the time, Iggy Pop, whatever, he's like coming through and he's like singing through like this like mess of the instruments just like fighting. They're personified fighting with one another, and he's just like in the middle of it, singing about sex or violence or whatever. What the hell? It's glorious. It's amazing. I think there's just so much, just the fact that like the sax finally comes in like the second half of the album, and then you have the LA blues. Holy, just yes, it is amazing. Just so, man, you just gotta, it just feels great. It's just a great album. You've got to listen. You've got to listen. Out of all the albums on the list, and you can laugh and make fun of me and call me a mute or whatever the hell. Out of all the albums on the list, I feel like this is the hardest one that's like to actually pin down why I love it so much. Which is strange because it's like a pretty distinctive album. Like there are like a lot of very unique qualities to this record, but I feel like it's still hard to describe why exactly. I mean, I love it so much and why I've listened to it so many times. I think my best theory though is a unique thing for me when I listen to this album is I feel like I actually remember individual times which I've listened to the music like extremely well. Like I mean, for like all these albums on the list, I can remember like, times I was listening to it, but I feel like I can remember like numerous instances of me just like listening to certain songs or like being moved by certain parts. And I don't know if any other album can like create these just highly visceral, super memorable moments when you're listening. I guess it just must be some emotional, potent core that like makes you remember. But yeah, for me, that's what this album is. It's just so, like, I feel like I can remember, at least some tinges of every single time I've listened to it. And that's why I think I love it so much. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what else can you ask for music than to create these just beautiful moments you can, relive without even having to listen to the album. Daydream Nation, its biggest, most obvious strength is its songwriting. And since that songwriting is built on just like the unique way in which the band members collaborate and jam and like create their songs, I think it's like actually just an album that's just a testament to how great teamwork and synergy and collaboration can be. I mean, like, think about it. This album has basically 3 different vocalists to it, and they all carry their own energy. They all carry their own way of writing lyrics. They all have their own themes they're talking about. I mean, although, all these songs are underscored by like this like super awesome punk like satirist, like, sort of like almost subtle angst that they're portraying. But I think the fact that all of these vocalists, they're all portraying something different and they're all giving their own material, I feel like that works so well to create just this unique experience that makes all these songs so memorable. You would think, with how much they're doing and how much, you feel like there'd be some falls or some faults, especially for an album as long as Daydream Nation. But every single song I could listen to like 5 times in a row without getting bored of it. Like, they're just so exciting. There's so much just memorable moments built up in all of them. You know, the fact that the songs are so dynamic and changing constantly, feels like there's like always at least, you know, like 3 moments it's just like, yes, it feels incredible. I don't know, I just love Sonic Youth, and I think this is their best album. I don't know what else to say. Kid A is essentially like the perfect encapsulation of like the digital dystopia, you know. It's like, you know, you're lost at sea, you know, looking around at like an ocean of just like a world you can no longer comprehend. It just hits this emotional core in so many different portrayals on like every single song. I mean, I think like the best like 2-song rung in this album is between the national anthem and How to Disappear Completely. And those 2 songs, they're hitting this same depressive, like troubled core. But I mean, the national anthem is just this insanely manic, depraved, insane, you know, super stressed song. And How to Disappear Completely is just like this pure embodiment of like melancholy. Like it's just so depressing. But these 2, they come directly between each other on the album. I think every single song in this album is just, the songwriting is just so perfect orchestrated, and the songs are just so unique and so memorable and so, you know, ahead of their time, that every single song is just hitting a different aspect of the same emotional core as just like struggling to get out, and it's just so, you know, heartbreaking to just listen to. It's really moving. It really is a moving album just to listen to start to finish. Like there's just so many brilliant, beautiful moments. I think Lift Your Skinny Fists is basically just the biggest album I've ever listened to. But not in terms of like actual length. Like there are actually, you know, I mean, multiple albums on this list which are much longer than this album. But I think in terms of scope, in terms of subject matter, and in terms of just execution, it's a massive, massive album. It feels gargantuan to listen to. This record here, it feels like an ancient tablet that just sort of exists. Like there's no, it's so mysterious. You know, the songs are so long. There's like each 20 minutes long, like a full vinyl side for each song, and it feels so cryptic. Like, I mean, look at all the like the different movements. I know I'm basically just like flexing the fact that I own this, but whatever. I think it's important. Just this album is so massive and so beautiful and breathtaking that you just have to be enveloped in its own world every single time you listen. It's stunning. It is truly stunning. And just the portrayal of the apocalypse and just the end of the world. I feel like there are a few albums that could actually, you know, truly capture what it feels like, and I feel like this is one of them. It is just so impressive. God, this album works on just so many different levels. I don't even know how to begin with it. Like, I want to talk about the production, because I feel like that's what initially like drew me to this album, what I've always loved maybe the most. But I feel like if I focus too hard on just how good and how perfectly orchestrated these songs are, like I'll distract from the fact that like the actual like overarching story and the overarching like narrative in each of these songs, I feel like I'll be overlooking those. This portrayal of fame is so compelling, and you know, as someone who's never been famous, you know, it's just so interesting to look at. Just the actual lyricism too, just the way it portrays, you know, portrays not only just like the luxury and like the beauty of being wrapped up in this fame, but also just like the strain it can have on, you know, your personal sense of identity and also on your relationships. I think it captures these things so well, and the album is so excessive and so massive in the ways it portrays these things that, I mean, it's perfectly encapsulating, you know, kind of the themes it's hitting at. If this album didn't have, you know, this 9-minute long opus with this 3-minute seemingly, you know, I mean, obviously I love the outro, but with this seemingly like, you know, inexplicable outro at the end, like it wouldn't really be an album about excess, an album about fame, an album about, you know, giving it everything. There's just so much here to look at and to feel and to experience. And I don't know, it hits me every single time. I know a lot of people actually like think that on this album, you know, it's like sort of reconciliatory. It's kind of like, you know, like a compromise record almost. I mean, I think Kanye's even expressed this sentiment before. And I can kind of see that. But I think also what's interesting is because like the nature of this album and, you know, the fact that he was trying to create his masterpiece and trying, you know, to try and appeal, he perfectly encapsulated all of the things that he knew worked. Every single thing he'd mastered beforehand, he put into this record. And every single innovation idea he had in the future, to some extent, is included on this album. It's just breathtaking. It's amazing. I don't think I'll ever be able to divorce my feelings on this album from the fact that it's basically the first ever, like, you know, record I sat down and listened to because, you know, I wanted to get into albums. Like this is the first one. And wow, what a great choice, honestly. What a perfect pick. I think what works is it's like the perfect archetypal album. It has like these insanely legendary A-side single songs, you know, Come Together, Something, Here Comes the Sun. But I mean, it's also got these like equally legendary B-side, like deeper cuts, you know, like Because, I Want You, even like, you know, songs like Oh Darling and Octopus's Garden. Like it has that balance and it has the extreme sequencing. And then they inject this medley into it. And the medley, I think, is just one of the most moving pieces of music I've ever listened to. That was the thing I think that got me super into music. Just like that, just this, so how theatrical and how brilliant and how immaculate and dynamic the transitions into one another were, and how they just like blew any preconceived notions I had about, you know, like what music could be like. I think that's why I love this album so much and why it means so much to me and why I have just huge sentimental appeal to me. I mean, it also just kind of captures, like, this is like the band's last hurrah, and they knew they wanted to create something, you know, for the people who had supported them, just to like capture this moment of their lives. And I think they did it perfectly. They knew they had to make like a magnum opus, and they just did it. And everything about it is perfect. In framing this list, like, you know, objectively correct, you know, the perfect albums, I did luckily pick a number one that's pretty easy to justify. And despite the fact that this album, you know, directly or indirectly influenced, like, what, like 70% of the albums on this list? Despite that, I think it is kind of hard to articulate why this album works so well. And I think I've got it, though. I feel like every single song is its own completely developed, unique world that you get transported to every single time you listen. So you start the album on Sunday Morning, which is this like extremely delicate, beautiful, sort of enveloping song. It's just entrancing. And, you know, it just captures, like, I get goosebumps every single time I listen to it. It's just like so emotional and so beautiful. And then, you know, all of a sudden you're swung into I'm Waiting for the Man, which is like this like really hard, you know, drony, you know, punk song. And for whatever reason, just not only does the transition between the two of them somehow work and somehow feel natural, but I mean, the portrayal of this new landscape is just as convincing as the one as the last. And I mean, then the next song, Femme Fatale, you're transported to like a similar world to Sunday Morning, like you're going back and forth, and it's still working. Like you're still in a new environment, you're still in like a new musical world, I guess. There's some obvious themes in this album that are like portrayed in a lot of the different songs, but I feel like even those themes, they're portrayed in hugely different ways. Like compare, you know, Heroin to Run, Run, Run to I'm Waiting for the Man. Like these are three songs about drugs, but the way in which, you know, like they don't feel like all that similar. They feel like the way they portray drugs and they portray that, you know, dependency and that lifestyle is so unique and so different to each of them. I'll Be Your Mirror and Femme Fatale, they're both songs about love, kind of at the end of the day, but I mean, I'll Be Your Mirror is a song about, you know, the security that you get from love, and Femme Fatale is kind of just how love can be weaponized to like play with your emotions and just like destroy you. Like these themes that are being used are so crippling. These worlds that are being created are just so crippling and just so human, but they're always unique and they're always in and of themselves just perfect. I don't know how else to articulate it. It's just, they're immaculate. Every single time I listen to it, it's like I'm exploring just this brittle universe filled with all these different worlds of, you know, of broken people, of, you know, depression, of sex, of violence. And it's just incredible. I don't know. It's just, and it's so creative, and it makes you give so much inspiration and so much, you know, heartbreak and so much emotion every single time. I don't know. I love the album. I'm almost like cracking up. I don't even know why. Need some water. But yeah, I love this record. And if you, for whatever reason, you know, you haven't listened to this album, or, you know, it doesn't connect with you, I mean, I doubt the fact that you've actually, you know, you're probably skipping to the very, very end to watch this, which, I mean, you know, I can understand this video took me like 6 months. So I can understand the feeling of this being a daunting video to watch. But yeah, I think it's great. I think this album's beautiful. So yeah, it's the end of the video. That's all 100 albums. That took forever. This video took me... I wanted to make this video back in January. Actually, my goal was to release it in January because I was an idiot who didn't realize, you know, that it'd actually take a lot of dedication to make this video. But yeah, it's done. It's done. This is the video. I'm going to be putting on screen here a bunch of honorable mentions albums that I considered putting on the list at one point, or maybe I'd started listening to them as I was working on the list. It's actually the case. Some of those albums, actually, I'm planning to make future videos about that I've listened to since starting work on this project. I would recommend watching those videos. That's kind of the future of the channel. I don't know where the things will go with. I don't know if people are even gonna watch this video, especially this far into the video. But if you watched it, if you enjoyed it, really, really glad you liked it. Really, really glad that I put so much effort into something that you could enjoy. So yeah, I guess that's the video. Peace out. And by the way, make sure to like and subscribe.